Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first budget hearing. We will be getting a presentation by our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Ramona Bivens. Before we do, we will have a moment of silent prayer followed by Pledge of Allegiance. If you would, please stand with me. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. So before we get started, let's make sure we have a roll call of commissioners who are present. Commissioner DeMont Davis.
Present.
Commissioner Gail Hambrick.
Here.
Commissioner Sana Gregory.
Present.
Commissioner Felicia Franklin Warner.
Present.
All right, Madam Clerk, all commissioners are present. We're going to have public comment before or after? After, okay. At this time, then, I'm going to ask Ms. Bivens, the Chief Financial Officer, to come forth with her presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, and Commissioners. This evening, I will be presenting the fiscal year 2021 proposed annual budget. In accordance with OCGA, the board is required to adopt a budget each year. We are also required to have one public hearing, which is what we're doing today to satisfy that requirement. When we adopt the budget, we'll adopt the total budget. And the budget consists of six funds that we operate under: General Fund, the Special Revenue Fund, Capital Projects Fund, Debt Service Fund, Internal Service Fund, and the Enterprise Fund. This evening we'll be focusing on the General Fund, as that is where the day-to-day operations for the county is accounted for, and also that is what the tax dollars support that fund. We hear a lot about the discussion around the economy, recessions, et cetera, due to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. During the past year before the pandemic, we had approximately 1,250 jobs created or committed per the Clayton County Economic Development Office, as well as $116 million in total investments and project announcements. However, our unemployment rate, as compared to last year, has increased from 4.5 to 6.2% as of March this year when comparing to March of last year. And we attribute that to COVID, as we all know that a lot of businesses were closed and people were unemployed. And just not only here in Clayton County, but in the Atlanta metro area, the state, and nationally and regionally, the unemployment rate has gone up significantly. For March, the Atlanta metro area compared to our 6.2 was 4.4, and the state was 4.6. We just received the preliminary April data, and it shows that our unemployment rate has jumped to 16%, which is expected because we have a full month of closure for the month of April versus a half a month, and some businesses weren't even closed in March. Atlanta metro area had a 12.8%, and the state is 11.9%, and I believe the national unemployment rate was around 14% for April. These are all preliminary numbers. The Department of Labor will be adjusting those numbers accordingly. This next slide shows.
Madam CFO, this,
I'm sorry?
just to point out that number is also indicative of the number of jobs that are lost at the airport as well.
That is correct, because of the almost closure of the airport. They're still operating, but at a very, very reduced capacity, yes. This just shows you a graph of the ebbs and flows of the unemployment rate, starting back in our previous recession in 2008, when we had 7.6, and we see it went up to as high as 13.5%. But since then, it has come down each year, with 4.4 last year being our lowest. We were on target to have an even lower rate this year, but because of the pandemic, we went up to 6.2% for March, and again, the preliminary, you see it where it went up significantly to 16%. We do anticipate it coming down slightly because a lot of businesses opened back in May, not a lot, so we're not gonna see a lot of decrease, but maybe as the months go, we'll see it come back down. In February, we were at 4.3% before the pandemic hit, so it shows that we were trending in the right direction to this pandemic, so the increase is not due to something that we've done or we're doing wrong in the county that's causing us to have a high unemployment rate. We can attribute that to the pandemic. Some of the challenges that we continue to face for FY21 is the state legislation that eliminated the aviation fuel sales tax. That became effective last year in July. And we estimated at the time that it would be approximately $6 million per year. The state did provide a grant to replace those funds for 3 years, for fiscal year 19, 20, and 21. We've only had to use 1 year of that. We still have $12 million in our reserve account that we're anticipating to use to balance next year's budget, which I'll discuss later. The reduction in the decreased sales tax has a direct impact on our property taxes when we're calculating our millage rate, because the lost credit, which is the local option sales tax credit that we give our citizens to give them a credit on their property taxes, it is lower whenever the sales tax revenue goes down. So as that decreases, it decreases our lost credit as well, which impacts our net millage rate. Clayton County continues to work and collaborate with the school district as well as the municipalities in the county to explore other revenue streams from the airport and their potential state legislation that we can benefit from that's still in discussion as well. I just wanted to show this slide to show how the lost collections impacted us by eliminating that jet fuel. I just did for the last 4 years and did an estimate for this year, and see in 2018, we collected $38.9 million. In 2019, the first full year of the exemption, it decreased by $5 million to 33.9. And we're on tracking to decrease again this year by about $4 million to 31.8 by the end of this fiscal year. Other challenges, revenue challenges that we have is from COVID-19. As I stated earlier, there are a lot of uncertainties on what's going to happen moving forward. We may see an increase in people going back to work and a decrease in our unemployment rate. Our sales tax revenues may increase some, although we didn't see a lot of decrease in between February, March, and April. It appears that people were still shopping. But we do anticipate that because of some of the provisions provided to homeowners due to COVID-19, people are not working through the mortgage forbearances. When people pay their mortgage, a lot of them have their escrow included in that for their property taxes and their insurance, where if they're not paying their mortgages, that escrow is not getting paid as well. So we are uncertain on how that would be paid. We don't feel that the lenders will be able to pay that for the number of people. We haven't been able to get a number of people that have taken advantage of that, but that's still a concern of ours, that if people are not paying their mortgages due to COVID-19 and they've taken advantage of the forbearances, excuse me, then we won't have a means to collect that revenue when property taxes are due later on in the fall of this year. Also, those people that don't have an escrow, what we call direct pay, they pay us directly out of their own pockets. There may be a decrease in payments there or delinquencies because of people's inability to pay, because they may have been impacted by unemployment and they just don't have the finances to pay. So in the past, we've used a 97.5 or 98% collection rate, and we've actually far exceeded that in the past, which is attributed to some of our we've been able to increase our fund balance over the last few years. But we decided to go with the lower rate to account for that, to a 96% collection rate, which is reflected in the budget that we're presenting as well. Another area where we may have some issues with revenue challenges is going to be threats to state aid. As we all know, the state has been discussing cutting their budgets. So we do have a few people, not a lot, that their salaries are reimbursed by the state. So I know when the state is making cuts, we did confirm that the library will be making a reduction, but not on the salary side. So they're maintaining their funding for the salaries for our library personnel. However, in some of the operation areas, they may be making cuts in the grant there. But our main concern for the salaries, if they have any furloughs, then how would that impact the county employees that we actually pay that are county employees, but we're reimbursed by those? So that's another issue that we have looked at as well. On the property tax side, we received a preliminary digest from a tax assessor on April the 20th, I believe, or maybe mid-April of this year. And based on that, you see a continuation of property value increasing as we have the last few years. The last year, the values were up 4.6%. This year, they're up 8.7%, which is about $647 million more than the values from last year. We're recommending not changing the net millage rate, which we'll discuss later. This budget is built on maintaining the current net millage rate of 15.596. This slide here shows the tax digest history. Again, this is the preliminary digest. As stated on the previous slide, you can see where we've had significant increases in the digest as the years have come by. Same as last year, this year we went from $8.3 billion to $9.2 billion. After you take the exemptions, there are exemptions for certain properties that are exempt from the taxes, then we have a net M&O digest for $8.2 million compared to $7.5 last year. And, excuse me, Jason, can you take that X off? We can't see that. At the bottom, no? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So our gross millage rate, we're recommending, in order to maintain the net millage rate, is reducing the gross millage rate from 20.557 that we had for last year to 19.792 because the lost credit is lower than it was last year. So that will allow us to maintain the net millage rate of 15.596. The net taxes levied, what would be billed, is $127.4 million. And that would be an increase of about $10 million more than what was billed last year. So this slide just shows the summary of the tax digest as compared to last year. Our net assessed values, as I stated earlier, increased from 7.5 to $8.2 billion in value. The base millage rate, we're reducing it from 20.557 to 19.792. The lost sales tax credit, the lost credit is 4.196 versus 4.961. And again, that is mainly due to the decrease in the sales tax. However, we had an increase in property value. So those are the two variables that are used to calculate that lost credit. So movement of either of those can either increase or decrease that. In this case, because the sales tax went down and the property values increased, the sales tax credit decreased by 0.765. So that's where why we decreased the base millage rate by the same amount. Otherwise, our our millage rate would have increased to 16.36, but I felt it prudent that we leave it at the 15.596 due to the current economic environment with people losing their jobs, et cetera. So again, the gross property tax levy will be $127,470, and we're estimating that we'll collect $123, but I'm sure we'll collect more than that because in the past we have as well. This, again, as I stated, was a preliminary digest. The assessment notices were mailed to homeowners or property owners on May 8th. They are in the appeal process now. Between now and the deadline is June 22nd. I spoke with the tax assessor last week, and he stated that there has been an increase, a significant increase in the appeals, and he said he mostly attributes that to people being at home and to having the ability to now do it electronically, whereas in the past they had to come into the office and do it. So again, that deadline is the 22nd. Once he gets those and gives us what we call a lockdown digest, the final digest that will be used to bill off of. If there's an increase in property values, then that would be a positive effect. And if it's a decrease, it would have a negative effect, and we would need to look at maybe some way, so that would reduce our revenue. We would need to look at some other areas where we could maybe make some reductions if needed. So the general fund budget as proposed for FY 2021, we are beginning, we're projected to end this fiscal year with a fund balance of $105.4 million. That's an increase of about $8 million from last year's ending fund balance of $97 million. Included in that fund balance is the $12 million from the state that we have remaining, because we have $6 million to use for fiscal year 2021. And then we didn't use the $6 million last year, even though we had it available. We didn't need to use it. We had enough revenues to cover our expenditures. Our revenues, our estimated revenues is $216.2 million. Our estimated expenses at $228.8 million. As you see, there's a difference that our expenses exceed our revenues by $12.6 million. However, we're proposing to use the $12 million that we have in the fund balance from that sales tax money to balance our budget this year. So we'll be using $12.6 million of fund balance, and then that would leave us with a projected $92.8 million at the end of next fiscal year, if we have to use all of that money. When we put this budget together, this is before we had everything done, we're ready to rock and roll before the pandemic hit. When the pandemic hit, we had to stop, back up, and rethink how we were going to do this because of the decrease in revenues on what we thought would happen with sales tax, because businesses were closed and weren't operating, so we didn't think that sales tax would be generated at the level to support what we would like to do moving forward. There were a lot more requests on the table that the chairman and I were looking at approving or including in the budget, but with pandemic occurring, uncertainty of what's going to happen in the future with the revenues, et cetera, we said, okay, we can at least maintain what we have had for the last fiscal year. So this budget includes everything that was in the budget for fiscal year 2020, so we're maintaining the same funding level. It also includes a 2% COLA for all employees. The chairman wanted to make sure that the employees were able to have an increase in their income, especially with where we are now. It also includes a merit increase at a reduced tier. The last couple of years, we had a merit increase. We had 5 tiers. It started at a 1.25, and you were eligible to get up to 6% based on your salary bands. This year, we're reducing that to 3 tiers with a maximum of 3.75, which is equivalent to 3 steps. This budget also will continue the public safety relocation incentive that was started last year. And we also have funding for the operations of the new facilities that we're onboarding this year: the Northeast Senior Center, the Lakes Bayview Recreation Center, the Northwest Library, and the Flint River Community Center as well, for salaries, benefits, as well as other operating expenses for those new facilities. And if you'll recall, we had a presentation by the actuary on the pension plan on making some assumption changes so we could bring us into line to make sure that we were funded under state guidelines. And at that time, the amount that we needed to infuse into the pension fund was $6 million. So this budget includes a one-time expense of $6 million for pension fund contributions per that actuarial evaluation recommendation earlier this year. This shows our revenue by sources, just a graph of showing where the sources of revenue, where we derive our revenue from. And as you can see, the majority of our revenue comes from property taxes and other taxes and assessments, with property taxes being 55.53% of our total revenues, which I believe I said was $216 million. And then the other taxes and assessments, this is where our sales taxes is part of that, and other assessments is $50.5 million. And then the other areas we have are licenses and permits, intergovernmental revenue, charges for services, which is the next highest, and then fines and forfeitures, interest and dividend income, other revenues, and other financing sources, which is where the $13 million is, where the $12.6 million is included in the revenue source to balance the budget. On the expenditure side, the $228 million of that, 68.6% of that is in personnel. That is, as with most organizations, 67 to 72% of an organization's operations is in personnel and human capital, and that's indicative the same here. And the next area of the highest is operating expenses. That's our normal day-to-day supplies, travel, contracted services, professional services, all of those items are included in operating expenses. It's 29.5% of the budget at $67.5 million. And then the rest is in capital outlay, debt service, and other financing uses, which is where we transfer money to, that's where our matching money is for some of the funds, grants that we have to have a provider match for. And by category, this shows the categories that we're spending our money in. As you see, courts and law enforcement, public safety, and general government are the top three expenditure categories, with courts and law enforcement at 33.2%. General government is 27.2%. That's for most of the departments. Then public safety is 26.1% at $59.8 million. And then parks and recreation, tax assessment and collections, transportation and development, health and welfare, libraries, and operating transfers out are the other categories where our expenditures are being spent. Oops. And in summary, again, we're anticipating beginning fiscal year 2021 with $105.4 million in our fund balance, estimated revenues of $216.2 million, estimated expenses at $228.2, which leaves us a shortage of a shortfall of $12.6 million, which we'll be using the $12 million that we had remaining from the sales tax grant that we received. So, and then another $600,000 out of fund balance. So the $12.6 million out of fund balance will leave us an ending fund balance, projected ending fund balance of next year of $92.8 million, which is still a good fund balance for us to have. Because again, we are uncertain of what's going to happen in the future, and this is like our rainy day fund. When we adopt the budget, we have to adopt a total budget of all funds that I mentioned. We operate under 6 different types. The total budget for all funds is $342.4 million. Of that, 67% of it is in the general fund, the $228.8 million. Special revenue funds, which are our grants, that's 39.9, that's 12% of the total budget. Debt service fund is $2 million, it's 1% of the budget. Internal service fund, this is where we budget for the our insurance, health insurance, employee insurance, and our pension. We started budgeting pension in there as well, so that total is 68.5, that's 20% of our total budget. And then our enterprise funds is $3 million, it's 1% of the total budget. As you will see, there's nothing budgeted there for capital projects funds. Most of our capital projects funds they're SPLOST funded. As you know, we have a referendum on the ballot for next week. So when we bring the budget back for final adoption, hopefully at the next board meeting, we will be able to budget then based on the outcome of the election next week. We will have a number to go in there. Good business practice is to dictate having a minimum of 1 month's operating expense in reserve. Right now, our current average operating monthly expenditures are $17 million. We're projecting to end the year with 105.4, and that we're well above the what we need. So the reason why we want to keep an adequate fund balance is because from the months of July through November, we are not collecting any tax revenue. And as you saw earlier, the majority of our budget is, our revenues are from tax revenues. So that fund balance allows us to operate until we start collecting that money. So as we go from July to November, we see a decrease in the fund balance. But if it goes back up once we start collecting taxes. If we didn't have an adequate reserve, we would have to issue a TAN, a tax anticipation note, to hold us over until we received our property taxes. Since I've been here in the last 7 years, I think even prior to me, I don't recall the county ever having to do a tax anticipation note, and it's because we've had an adequate fund balance to hold us over. So in order to add any additional items to this proposed budget, we would have to have some additional revenue, either through growth in the digest or a millage increase. We can reallocate existing items in the budget. We can reduce in some areas and move that to other areas that we want, if we want to add something to it. Or we could use the reserves, which we don't like to use unless it's a one-time non-recurring expense. Our budget calendar recap, the budget book was published on May 26th, I believe it was last Tuesday. The public hearing is being held today. We'll have the budget on the June 16th agenda to be adopted during the regular board meeting, and it will be amended if as needed. And if millage rates hearings are required, we will have those in July, but we won't know that until we receive the lockdown digest, which won't be until later in June or the first part of July per the tax assessor. and then we'll adopt the millage rate later in June. That is the end of the presentation that I have this evening, Mr. Chairman. And I'm turning
All
this
right, thank
over
you
to
for your presentation. Are there any questions from the board members for Ms. Bivens?
Yes, I have a couple of questions for
Commissioner
clarification.
Warner.
Oh, sorry about that, y'all. Okay. Let me go back. I made notes here. But I do want to hit that 17 million as the monthly expense. What was the basis for that amount exactly? Because when I looked at it for a monthly expense, it came up as 19. So maybe I added something in I shouldn't have.
That's an average of all the months that, a month year to date. I took an average of from July to March to April, and that's an average. That's our average monthly
Year
expenditure.
to date, not on the not on what you provided to us as a budget.
Now, if you take the, if you're referencing the monthly report that I sent for April, if you average all of those numbers at the bottom for the monthly expenses, the average is $17 million. Because if you look at it, every month it's not $19 million. It goes up and down depending on the expenses for that month.
Okay, the only reason I'm asking, because even though I'm looking at it, it's a little confusing because everything you presented today was off of this data. And that's not a big deal, but this data depicts a $19 million expenditure, expenses per month, as opposed to the 17. So that was one thing. And, but I'm glad to see the fund balance there. There was another question I had on, sorry, I got to go back through. I didn't want to interrupt you. The merit increases. The merit increases, what is the salary for those merit increases, the stop measure for those merit increases?
Commissioner Warner, actually, we have just sent well, not just sent it, we sent it to HR a few, either a week or 2 weeks ago, for her to come up with another recommendation or a plan to reset those bands, because in the past, as I stated, we had the 5 tiers. This year, we only have 3, so she's gonna have to redo those. So right now, I don't know what they're going to be, but they'll be similar to what they were in the past. But it'll only be 3 bands instead of 5.
Because even though we got a healthy fund balance, are we gonna go and provide merit increases to those individuals who had the opportunity to negotiate their salaries with us, where we bump them up and so forth? Or will the merit increases only apply to those making a certain dollar amount?
If I can interject, Commissioner Warner, merit increases are based on performance evaluation. Every employee is evaluated on their anniversary date. And if whatever score they receive based on their performance, that is where the band comes into play. So once, let's say, not officer, but an employee who is making less than 40,000, then they would be eligible for the top tier of 3.75. So they could receive anything from 0 to 1.25 to whatever, leading up to a max of 3.75. Anybody who's making like over 80 or so probably would not only be eligible for, except for 1.25%.
Okay, the reason I'm saying that is because those employees, we got 2,500 employees on average, and many of the employees that are making anywhere from about 40 and below, or even 50 to 60 and below, they don't have the luxury of coming before this board as many other employees that are making 80 and $100,000 can come and negotiate their salaries. And especially considering that where we are in an unpredictable financial future for our county, I wanted us to consider that. I want to make sure that we make those employees whole that are already really needing that COLA, cost of living increase, so that they have an opportunity for that merit increase, as opposed to us giving a merit increase to those that we've already increased their salaries significantly or bumped them up here or there. That was one question. The other question on the merit increase is more about operations. I do have to bring this up. It has been brought to my attention that some of the processing of the merit increases for those that are not making the 6 figures or lower, their merit increase, their paperwork is moving a little bit slowly. Some folks are still waiting to hear back. So I just wanted to put that on your mind, to kind of keep that in mind, so we can keep close look at that. And then one more thing, intergovernmental revenue. Does that include the 911 fees that we're receiving from the various cities, since we brought them on for 911?
Commissioner Newman, that is not, the E911 fund is a separate fund, so it's not included in the.
So that would be in our, it's the separate fund, is that the
It's
enterprise
special
fund?
revenue fund,
What is that included in, the enterprise?
a special revenue fund.
Special revenue, okay, I didn't hear you,
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
sorry. All right, that's all and then one last one, I'm sorry, property taxes, can you give a little bit of breakdown of that? Is that all commercial or residential, both combined together? What's the percentage for commercial, what's percentage for residential?
Don't have the digest with me, but I can get that to you, between this meeting and the next meeting. I have it on my laptop over here. I can get that to you, but I believe the majority of it was in, commercial, I think it was when I looked.
That's important, because a lot of people, may have a different perception of.
Don't hold me to it. I'm looking a few minutes, and when we finish it, I'll send it to you. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, any other questions from any of the commissioners?
Operating transfers out, what's included in that dollar amount?
As I stated earlier, that includes the match for any of the grants that require a match, where we have to transfer to the special revenue funds or any other fund.
Awesome. I think that's all the notes I made. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions from any other commissioners? All right, again, thank you, Ms. Bivens,
You're
for your
welcome. Thank you.
presentation. Now, the next, just for clarification purposes, the next board meeting that we will have a budget hearing prior to adoption.
We have, it's not really a budget, we only required to have the one budget hearing. We'll have to present, if we have an amended budget, or just present the budget again before you adopt it, so we can see what the final numbers are.
I got you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
All right, Madam Clerk, we have one person signed up for public comment. If you would, read the warrant.
For public input, please sign in on the budget public comment sheet located at the table. There will be a 3-minute time limit for each person who wishes to speak before the board.
All right, only one I have signed up is Mickey Garber.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you. Madam Clerk, that concludes the public comments. Is that it? All the business we have? Okay. All right, being no further business for this board, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second the motion. Those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? Thank you.